Welcome back to Rural Live TV. Thanks to TNR Pasture. Well, Rob, an issue that we've talked about for most of the week. Indeed, it took up a large part of the program on Monday, and we talked about it with a degree of excitement, and that is the vision that was unveiled earlier in the week by Tasmanian Premier David Bartlett regarding turning Tasmania into Australia's food bowl by way of some 13 irrigation projects totalling $400 million, Rob. A bold plan, a wonderful long-term vision, and interesting for us here on the mainland and perhaps in South Australia too, a view to perhaps pinching some of the top mines in irrigation that we have here in South Australia.
Yeah, well, it's probably timely that Tasmania are looking at this, but I think for me, the excitement is to see a state government actually being proactive about the food industry. I think that it's one that a lot of governments have taken for granted, and it's terrific to see Tasmania really grabbing the industry and deciding to have an absolute crack.
Well, the man pioneering that move is the Premier of Tasmania, and he's been kind enough to give us a moment of his time. David Bartlett, welcome to the program.
Great to be with you, Will and Rob. Thanks for having me on.
Well, let's just get to that first point that Rob made there, David, and that's that it's fantastic to see the food industry and agriculture at the forefront of a state's planning. I mean, we're a little bit rural-centric here on the program, as you might well imagine, but it's just fantastic to see.
Well, look, it's really is the centrepiece of our whole innovation strategy here in Tasmania. The fact of the matter is, and we know, as the Murray-Darling faces challenges in terms of water rights and environmental flows, as Australia, in fact, faces challenges, I believe, over the coming 2 to 3 decades in its own food security. I think there are predictions of Australia becoming a net food importer and so on. I believe, and I'm absolutely convinced, that Tasmania has a major role to play on the national scene in our national food security. And more to the point for Tasmania, of course, we have a real opportunity with an abundance of water. In fact, 14% of all of Australia's rainfall falls on 1.5% of its landmass, that is Tasmania. And of course, we're traditionally very, very good water managers because we've used, in Hydro Tasmania, we have the largest manager of a water asset anywhere in Southeast Asia. And we've been managing water to create electricity, of course, for really close to 100 years in Tasmania, and we're now going to use that same water in a much more structured way with $400 million worth of irrigation schemes, some 250,000 Olympic swimming pools worth of extra irrigation water going into 13 key areas around Tasmania.
It's wonderfully exciting, and certainly statistically speaking, it's quite an impressive outline. 188,900 megalitres of irrigation water, and the claim that's grabbed a lot of headlines, David, 95% reliability for at least 100 years. I can tell you that certainly will resonate with people on the mainland that have struggled a bit over the last decade or so. I just guess before we look forward to what the plan might mean and how well you go attracting some of those irrigators, to look back, I mean, it's all very impressive and makes wonderful reading. I just wonder why then it hasn't been capitalised on until this time. Well,
it's an interesting cultural question, that one. Perhaps in some ways our strength, as I've discussed in Hydro Tasmania, there's also been a bit of a weakness. It has been that farmers squabbling with the sort of giant that hydro is in the Tasmanian context, to get access to that water over the last 50 years, I suppose, these debates have been going on in Tasmania for a long time, has been quite challenging. Now, what I've done is create, or what the Tasmanian government's done, has create Tasmanian Irrigation Development Board, and we've charged them as a corporate entity, if you like, or a statutory authority, to negotiate with Hydro on behalf of farmers, on behalf of irrigators, and I've also appointed a minister who is both Minister for Primary Industries and Water and Minister for Energy, and therefore has oversight of the state-owned hydro electric corporation as well. So we are, I guess, breaking down some barriers there, and what we now have 13 key schemes that we are certain the vast majority of those schemes will tick the triple bottom line of economic, financial and environmental outcomes that we must tick. We're certain that 95% of those 13 schemes will be rolled out within the next 2 to 3 years. We've made a good start, and I'd encourage your readers, or listeners I should say, to go to the Tasmanian Irrigation Development Board's website, and you can see exactly what the schemes are, exactly what they'll present, exactly what the costs of the water will be, the 95% reliability of that water as well.
I'll certainly be going to that to have a look, David. I think one of the issues is that traditionally in Australia, irrigation has occurred in low rainfall areas, and what we've ignored is that enormous lift in productivity that we can actually get by putting it into some of our more productive land. So I think that's a terrific move down there. A lot of states had a crack at the food industry back in the 90s, and it seemed to fade off. So I think it's going to be really important that you get bipartisan support and have a long-term commitment from the state to the whole thing, because as you get the production going, then no doubt the marketing side of it is going to become enormous. And Tassie's got a great brand as such. So the marketing, while it won't just happen, you've actually got a very good product to actually present.
Absolutely, and I couldn't agree more with you, in fact, in that this very much is a paddock to plate strategy, or in fact, I've been saying petri dish to plate strategy, because really we're investing in the research that will underpin the innovation that's required as well. We have a joint venture in the Tasmanian Agricultural Research Centre that is a joint venture effectively between the Tasmanian State Government and the University of Tasmania. So all our great research works very hand in hand with our farmers. We're investing in these irrigation schemes, but we're investing further down the chain as well, in particularly looking at climate change and providing farmers with great climate change data. And we've seen already through our Climate Futures project that if of all the wine growing regions in the world, you would be mad, in my view, to invest in any others other than Tasmania and perhaps New Zealand, but let's not talk that up too much, because we've shown clearly that over the next 40 to 50 years, climate change will less affect Tasmania as a wine growing region than any other major wine growing region in the world. And we're already a cool climate wine area, of course. So we see key areas: wine, aquaculture, in fact, it might not be on land, but it still requires water, interestingly enough, dairy, red meat, and innovative horticulture in high-end products like cherries and apricots and so on. We've had some work done by the Australian Innovation Research Centre, who have shown us, through Professor Jonathan West's work, that those 5 sectors can add $1 billion in revenues each over the next coming decade. And if, interestingly enough, they've shown that if Tasmania were able to achieve that, that Tasmania would go from the lowest per capita GSP state in Australia to the highest overnight, basically.
Yeah, I think you're on a
phenomenal.
You're on the right tram, and I've been frustrated over a long time that governments haven't given enough, actual help to the food industry, because I think they just take it for granted. It's always been there, and we've never sort of nurtured it the way that we should have. As far as the Murray-Darling Basin goes, obviously there's a lot of irrigators there who've been frustrated with the low allocations that they've been able to use in recent years. So you may get a few jump on board.
Well, I hope so, and I'll be coming up your way January, late January, I expect, and I'll be bringing the head of our Irrigation Development Board with me, some local farmers, irrigators in Tasmania who are already using some of this water, and also Professor Jonathan West, who's done a lot of the academic work underpinning our strategy. And we'll be going to towns like Mildura, Berry, Griffith, and essentially talking to irrigators on the ground and talking to them about the opportunities that are available in Tasmania. Look, I'm aware already of farmers, irrigators in those areas who have invested in land in Tasmania. They are doing that, they tell me, as a risk mitigation activity, and we welcome that. We want to see other irrigators coming in. We think that that breeds innovation on the ground, with highly skilled irrigators coming into the Tasmanian mix and working with our already highly innovative farmers here, can only see growth. And the time now is now for investment. We've got water rights up for sale, of course, but more to the point, as these water rights and schemes are built over the next 2 to 3 years, the capital growth in the land in Tasmania that's under irrigation will be massive.
Premier, how much did the timing have to play in the announcement of this plan? Certainly would have been in development for quite a while now, but it would seem fortuitous if it wasn't a case of good planning that it's announced at such a time with so many irrigators disaffected with the Murray-Darling Basin's guide to a draft plan. So did it factor into the decision?
Well, look, we've been working on this plan, and in fact, within Tasmania, I've been talking about Tasmania as a high-end food bowl for the nation for a couple of years now, and we've been putting in place the planning and starting to turn the first sod on these irrigation schemes over the last 2 years, and we've got about 2 to 3 years more work to be done to finish those irrigation schemes. But some of them are already online. But really, I've been watching, as everybody in Australia, I think, with a bit of horror, has been watching what's going on in the Murray-Darling, what the challenges are there, and as Premier of Tasmania, I see, while that is a great challenge for the nation and for that area, I see great opportunity for my state, and I'm intent on capturing it.
Premier, I want to take you back to your comments previously with regard to climate change. Now, when we first saw that wonderful figure of 95% allocation for the next 100 years, we suspected you might well be a climate change sceptic. But am I to understand, given all that's been said, that that actually factors in some climate change models?
Absolutely. In fact, we have, Tasmania, interestingly enough, Hobart is really one of the world's centres in terms of climate change studies, simply because we're a polar gateway, a lot of marine and Antarctic studies, and obviously the Southern Oceans and Antarctica have a huge role to play in climate change research. Now, our Climate Change Futures project, and again, I encourage your listeners to Google that and do some reading on it. Our Climate Change Futures project here has mapped Tasmania down to essentially 10 kilometre square granularity and shown over the next 50 years what climate change impacts will occur, and they are minimal. They are minimal comparative to the rest of the planet for a range of reasons, but mainly because of our proximity to the Southern Oceans. The other thing we have invested in, and we'll be announcing in the next few weeks, is a program called Wealth from Water, where we're in fact mapping soil types down to field level across the state, providing that data for farmers, which will essentially show where in areas that have traditionally been sheep grazing areas, returning maybe $1,000 a hectare to the farmer per annum, where perhaps cherries would grow very, very well in those soil types, and we can overlay that soil type data with climate change data over our irrigation areas, and you have a very powerful set of tools about what sustainably can be, what's the highest value produce that you can extract from any given sort of field in Tasmania over the coming years, and with confidence and sustainability in that data.
Well, it's exciting.
It certainly is.
All the best with it, David. As I said at the outset, it's terrific to see a state government really pushing hard for the food industry and giving some encouragement to it.
I appreciate the comments, Will and Rob, and be happy to come back and talk to you again as we progress.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Premier David Bartlett, the Premier of Tasmania, joining us there. We look on with interest, Rob, to see how he goes when he visits some of those southern Murray-Darling Basin communities and how he's received, because I imagine it'll be wonderful news to the ears of some people in that area.
Yeah, there may be some willing sellers in the basin who just want to have a new start, greater surety. So there's a possibility that there might be a few experienced people shift. Positioning themselves for something very exciting down there in Tasmania. We best go to a break. Back with more on Rural Live TV in just a moment.